Welcome to the Mutual UFO Network Los Angeles. I'm Sandra Marsh. I'm the speaker coordinator. I'd like to introduce our this evening's guest, Greg Bishop. The title of his talk is Project Beta, How the U.S. Government Created an Alien Invasion. In the early 1980s, electrical physicist Paul Bennewitz thought he had stumbled onto evidence of an alien invasion. Unbeknownst to him, he had been fed disinformation by the Air Force Office of Special Investigations in a counterintelligence operation. The plan backfired. However, because the incident led to renewed calls for disclosure of government UFO secrecy. In the process, Bennewitz had actually stumbled onto strange lights and signals that were part of a vast black budget projects that were going on at Kirkland Air Force Base, having to do with Kirkland Air Force Base projects sponsored by the Air Force, Defense Intelligence Agency, and the National Security Agency. The Bennewitz episode would provide the government cover-up story for those wild UFO conspiracy tales for the next 20 years or so, and serve as a warning to researchers not to confuse the authority of the messenger with the truth of the message. Thanks to the efforts of author-researcher Greg Bishop, the truth behind the Bennewitz story and its implications to current ufology are finally being revealed. Bishop's lecture will feature personal notes, correspondence, and some of the verified disinformation that was fed to Bennewitz that led to his eventual breakdown and, sadly, his institutionalization. His presentation will also include an in-depth analysis of the disinformation campaign by an agent specifically assigned to draw Bennewitz into an event that led to his eventual breakdown and institutionalization. His presentation will also include an in-depth analysis of the disinformation campaign by the agent that was specifically designed to Bennewitz. Greg Bishop is the author of the book Project Beta, the story of Paul Bennewitz, national security, and the creation of the modern UFO myth. Greg says he has been fascinated with the no man's land between the extremes of the wide-eyed and closed-minded debunkery ever since 1991, when he co-founded a magazine called The Excluded Middle, a journal of UFOs, conspiracy research, psychedelia, and new science. It's now online at www.excludemiddle.com. Wake Up Down There, a collection of articles from the magazine, was published in 2000. His third and newest book, Weird California, how appropriate, was published by Sterling Publishers and Barnes & Noble in March of 2006. Greg's radio show, Radio Misterioso, can be heard on Sundays from 8 to 10 p.m. Pacific Standard Time at www.killradio.org. Interviews with fringe topic researchers and weird music are the usual fare. Please welcome our guest this evening, Greg Bishop.
Thank you.
I don't think I pronounced it.
That's all right. Hi, thanks. Actually, the title of the book is how the U.S. government created a modern UFO myth. A lot of people say the. I'm talking about a myth, I'm not saying the U.S. government created the subject of UFOs or that the ultimate source of it is connected with the government in any way. So I wanted to get that out of the way. Yeah, I got a different title every time I come up. I like how U.S. intelligence created an alien invasion. I think I suggested that as one of the titles to the publisher, but they changed it to U.S. government, which is fine. Okay, how many of you actually have how many of you have read the book? Oh, good. That means I can present this and nobody can say, wait, you said something else. I do add, every time I give the talk, which has been about, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 times, I add new stuff. I added stuff just yesterday morning before I put the lecture together and checked it over again. So there's always some new stuff. How many of you know about have heard of Paul Bennewitz and what happened to him? That's pretty good. Great. That means that I can really go to town here. Okay. So, Paul Bennewitz. Does that work? There we go. That's the only picture of Paul Benowitz that I was able to find. I put out a bounty of $100 if anybody could find an original picture different than this one, and nobody could. No UFO researchers, anyone, which is kind of weird. Apparently, he was kind of camera shy. Paul Benowitz was an electrical physicist. He earned his master's degree and was studying for his doctorate when the company he started became so successful. He said, well, screw the doctorate. I'm doing so well here. I don't need to continue in my education. So he actually started this company called Thunder Scientific Instruments, which made, and still makes actually, his sons still run the company. They're in Albuquerque, New Mexico. They make temperature and humidity instruments for high-profile clients like NASA, I think even the Air Force and the private industry, high-level specialized stuff, which he designed, built, and had manufactured. He started the company, I think, in the late 60s or early 70s, and it became very successful. It still is. That behind him he was a plane. He was a private pilot, too, which enters into the story later. That's their house, the Benowitz family home. Four Hills neighborhood is a well-to-do type neighborhood in Albuquerque, which actually happens to border right on Kirtland Air Force Base, which is very important to our story. There's a picture I took in March when I went back there. It's a private area, and it says no visitors without permission or whatever. And I was with a production company, and you know how production companies are. They drove right up to the house. They didn't go knock on the door or anything. I figured, well, I'm sitting here in front of them, might as well take a picture of the place. So it looks exactly like it did back in the 80s or whenever that picture was taken. Well, maybe not exactly. That's kind of weird. That is the address, though. Maybe Krista Tilton, whose book I took that from, got a picture of the wrong house, because that was the address. There's the sign for Thunder Scientific. It's located right on the border of Kirtland Air Force Base, just like his house. So no matter where he was, day or night, he was right next to the Air Force Base, and apparently had some business with him because of his company. You can see right down there, actually, it says Kirtland Air Force Base. This is the Wyoming entrance, and there's a warning sign there about not coming on the base without permission, or you'll get shot, and things like that. So yeah, the company is actually that way down the street, about half a block, but they've got this giant sign. Well, it's not giant, it's about maybe 15, 20 feet high, right at the entrance to Kirtland Air Force Base. You see it when you drive in. So, what's so special about Kirtland Air Force Base? Well, that's a satellite picture. I think you can still get it on the internet. It's funny, I looked for it. I got it for the lecture a couple of years ago, and then I looked again because I wanted to check something else, and it was taken off. But now it's back on again, so maybe they changed something. What you were looking at, Kirtland, this is all Kirtland Air Force Base, off the bottom of here, too. It goes for miles down here. That's Albuquerque International Airport, or no, I think this is. And it's right, yeah, when you fly into Albuquerque, you can actually see Kirtland Air Force Base and the fighters and everything there. The Benowitz home is right there. There's a country club. It's just this little enclave, nothing really little, but this neighborhood here, very expensive homes. There's the base golf course. This is Manzano Mountain, which is very important in the story here. This is a road and perimeter fence that goes all the way around it. It's a triple fence. It's electrified. Do I have a picture of it here? Well, that's the fence near Paul Benowitz's house with the same ubiquitous warning sign: "Do not trespass government property." And there's a road that the Jeeps and things drive on when they drive the perimeter. I shouldn't put things up here that people can read, because you start reading and then you stop listening, but that's fine. You know, it's human nature to start reading. What was going on with Manzano Mountain is in 1947, strangely enough, very, very significant date, of course, everybody here knows about. The Army Air Force, which it was at the time, decided that, well, maybe it was the Air Force by then. It got changed over in 1948, yeah. So this was right before it became its own entity. there was a large project initiated by the Air Force and headed up by General Leslie Groves, who was actually the guy in charge of the Manhattan Project. What they wanted to do was provide a place to store all these nuclear weapons components, maybe planes, things like that, underground where people couldn't see them. So they started digging into Manzano Mountain there. Actually, I'll show you. So this mountain here that you saw there, this is looking from right here at this direction. That mountain is completely full of tunnels, caves, apparently rooms as big as football fields to store aircraft and nuclear weapons components. And in the 1980s, when this story takes place, it was actually the largest storage area for nuclear weapons components in the world. So it was all over the press that something was being dug up there, and people flying in could actually see dirt being piled up. They said it looked like a giant anthill. Just to show you that it wasn't any big secret they were digging something there. There's the date and the paper. It was the Oregonian. I just happened to find that in some files. There's, for no particular reason, is a wider shot of the Manzano Mountain just to show you how it's about maybe a mile or two by about 4 miles long, and about maybe 1.5 miles to 2 miles away from this fence here, just to give you some idea of the scale. Paul Benowitz's house is up in this area right here. That fence I showed you is right on this side of the road. So he was right, you know, he could look straight off here into the base. Everybody that lives there can do that. And if you look, I told you about the fence that's going around. You can sort of see the fence there. I took this when I was researching the book, and then when I went back the next time, I thought there was a double fence. There's a triple fence, and it's electrified. And at least one or two of them, maybe all of them, and a couple people I talked to said that they had actually found people electrocuted and dead, like in here, that had tried to sneak in over the years. This is a very strange thing that I found when we were there last time too. We were taking a look at the mountain there, and you know, when you look at it, it doesn't really look like there's anything there. I mean, it's just a mountain and a bunch of scrub brush. But we were hanging out there at dusk when it was just getting dark, and one of the producers on the program said, "What's that light there?" So I took a picture of it, and it's actually an entrance to something. And I don't know why they turn the light on at night. Maybe they just don't care, and everybody knows that there's underground, you know, facilities there, so it doesn't really matter. But there's a big garage door type thing there. It was kind of near the base of the mountain. I just thought it was interesting because on that side of the mountain you can't really see anything. It's all on the other side where people can't see the mountain, which I actually got to see. I saw some of the entrances on the other side, which I will talk about. That's another view of the base. There's Albuquerque's airport. That's the main runway. If you fly into Albuquerque, you go right over the base. Nothing's really hidden, or so you would think. One of the things they have on the base is apparently the largest wooden structure in the world, completely wooden. There's no metal parts in it. The reason for that was it was used to test electromagnetic pulses, which is when a nuclear device, bomb or anything goes off, it creates this electromagnetic pulse, as a lot of you know probably, fries electronics, screws up everything, and delicate electronics in a plane. So what they used to do is they roll planes out on this, they tow them out and roll them out on this platform and subject them to huge electromagnetic pulses and test to see if the instruments all still worked and all that. That's kind of you can't really get any idea of the scale from that picture, so I found this one the other day. That's a B-52 sitting on it. So it's pretty big. But they found out after they'd done some tests that they couldn't produce a big enough electromagnetic pulse, even with all the power that they were drawing and all the capacitors they had to produce that pulse, so it was basically useless. But they used it for quite a few years. I guess it never did anything to the planes, so it was quite an expensive project. I talked to some people that worked at the base, and they said these no metal parts in any of these. It's all wooden. They had, some of the engineers had bolts and nuts and things made out of wood that were about that big around and about that long, just giant wooden bolts they used to put this thing together. Interesting thing, the most obvious thing on the base that you can see from outside the base, this is something I found when I was looking yesterday. Just to show you that Kirtland is still in the forefront of developing all kinds of different devices, weapons, etc. They actually pioneered some laser weapon systems there too. They can shoot from planes and melt rockets and things like that with. This one was very interesting though. It's called the active denial system, which is a wonderful euphemism for basically a microwave they point at people to burn their skin to get them to run out of the way. Now, apparently what it's supposed to do is it said it burns the top 1/64 or 1/16 inch of skin to the point where you feel uncomfortable and you get out of the way. But of course there's other stories about tanks melting and things like that, so who knows what's being developed there. But that is a picture actually from Kirtland Air Force Base, which I brought up on the internet, showing that they were involved heavily in the development of that device. And that's one mounted on a Humvee. I put Gulf War deployment. It's in the Gulf War, but I don't know if they would have this kind of camouflage for the Gulf War. However, it is being used right now to disperse crowds or maybe more, I do not know. Another strange facility there is a place called the Starfire Range, and what it looks like is just an observatory, but it's far more than that. It does have telescopes, but the telescopes are not what you think they're for. Another weird aspect of the base, this picture was taken in the early 80s on a tour of the base. Actually, I'll tell, since I told the story already, Bill Moore was driving through the base with Richard Doty, and Doty said, "Take a picture of that." Bill said, "Why?" It was just a bunch of buildings. And Doty said, "Take a picture of it and see what happens." So he took it back and developed it, and he lent me this 8x10 print. There's a telephone pole or something there. These are entrances to garages or warehouses or something. These are all buildings. And he said there's a fence right here you can sort of see if you look really closely. I should blow up the picture. But apparently there's some way to make that facility invisible to photography. So when you take a picture of it, it looks like a snowdrift. You can see it fine when you're standing there, but when you develop any pictures of it, it does that. And I've talked to some intelligence people, and they say, yeah, they can do that. That's been used for many, many years now, since at least the 80s and probably before. That's the facility for Sandia Labs, which are still one of the contractors on the Kirtland Air Force Base grounds. They were the ones that are involved with, well, I think with the laser testing at least, and many other things. And something else I'm going to talk about too, which is still sort of unexplained. So, Paul Benowitz was, like I said, was an electrical physicist. He had his own business. He didn't really have any other interest. I asked people, when I did interviews for the book, I said, what do you know about Paul? Did he go water skiing? Did he collect stamps? And people said, I don't know anything about him except he had this business and he was interested in UFOs. That's all he would talk about. So it's very hard to tell exactly what kind of person he was, except that he was very good at what he did. He was far above average intelligence, and he was very interested in the UFO subject. And because of this, he got involved in this case with a woman named Myrna Hansen. In late 1979, I believe, or early 1980, a woman was going home from a visit to Oklahoma. The tip of it goes right up to the edge of New Mexico. The little panhandle touches New Mexico. Apparently they were in that area and driving back. About 1 in the morning, she said that she saw some kind of ovoid object, a very large one and a smaller one next to it, floating over a field. And she said she saw a cow being sucked up into it. She also said that the things came over the road, shined a bright light, and they blacked out, and then when they woke up, they were driving back home again. Typical thing that you would hear from an abduction scenario. But this was 1979. It was before even Bud Hopkins' book Missing Time had come out, so, who the hell had a kind of, a framework for whatever an abduction should be? I find that very interesting when before things become popular and become talked over again and again. I think there's a lot of data there. But they didn't know anybody who knew anything about this. She called the police. The police didn't know what to do with it. They knew one police officer that sort of was dealing with weird stuff. His name is Gabe Valdez. Some of you have probably heard of him. He was a police officer, a state police officer in Dulce, which we will get into as well. He knew Paul Benowitz. He said, this woman has had some sort of weird experience. Maybe you could talk to her. So Benowitz said, sure, if you can get her down here. And the police actually got her in a patrol car and drove her from northeastern New Mexico all the way down to Albuquerque, about a 3-hour drive, maybe longer. Benowitz talked to her for a day or two and decided that he wanted to get somebody that was a psychologist, somebody had mental health field experience. And since he's a member of APRO, do people know what that is? Aerial Phenomena Research Organization? It was the other big group that died out when the founders died. They actually split off from MUFON, I think, in the 60s or 50s. And they were based in Arizona. Paul Benowitz is a member of APRO. This guy, Dr. Leo Sprinkle, was on their board. A lot of you probably heard of Dr. Leo Sprinkle. He's actually, he'd made his biggest mark, I think, up to that time with his involvement with, oh no, he wasn't involved with Travis Walton, but the next person that Benowitz got was. He had regressed another woman in Texas who had had some missing time as well, and he was just starting to get a handle on what was going on with what an abduction was and what happened in that missing time. So Paul Benowitz paid for a flight for Leo Sprinkle to come from Wyoming down to Albuquerque. He came to the door, and everybody was introduced. He regressed Myrna Hansen, and I don't think her son was with her too, but he was 8 years old. And she started describing things like this. These large vats with possibly animal or human parts in them, and a huge underground facility, all kinds of things. And Dr. Sprinkle never heard of this before, but he listened to her. She didn't do any drawings. This is a drawing of basically the same thing by another abductee, Krista Tilton. After he regressed her the first time, they took kind of a rest period. I think they did a couple more regressions. Then Leo Sprinkle went home. Benowitz said, would you be willing to come back and do some more of these? And Dr. Sprinkle said, sure, fine. I guess, I know everybody's reading that right now. Stop reading right now. When Dr. Sprinkle came back a month later, he told me this on the phone. I interviewed Leo on the phone, and he said, Paul came to the door, and his demeanor was completely different. Not only that, he had a rifle in his arm, and he had a pistol on his hip, and he told me to get in the house immediately because the aliens were there, and they were going to catch them and take them away. And he said, at that point, I didn't want to do any more regressions with Myrna Hansen because something had happened that not only would have contaminated her experience, but induced all this paranoia that he thought was no good for either her or for investigating the case. So I think he did short regression, and then he left, and he said, I don't want to work with this woman anymore because I'm not going to make anything better at this point. So he got another guy, Dr. James Harder, who had been the guy that had regressed Travis Walton and a few of the other people in the Walton Snowflake, Arizona case. And they ended up doing things like this is a letter he sent to Jim Lorenzen, who ran APRO. He was one of the founders, two people that ran it, him and his wife, and described to him what they thought they could do to keep aliens from influencing regressions. Things like the regression must be done in a shielded enclosure. The best options I'm aware of are an automobile and a garage. Use 3 layers of heavy aluminum barbecue-type foil to cover all windows. Grounded to the chrome trim around the windows. Masking tape to be used to hold it in place. Do not ground the auto. He thought that Myrna Hansen, she was not telling them what they needed to know because the aliens were influencing her thoughts. And they did things like hold umbrellas with aluminum foil over her. They took her to hospitals that were in X-ray rooms that were lead shielded, all kinds of things, because Benowitz and apparently James Harder thought that they weren't getting weren't getting pure information. They were getting what the aliens wanted them to think. So because of this, one, because there was no real milestone for abduction research, and two, because it sounded completely crazy, he was basically ignored. Jim Lorenzen and his wife Coral kind of said, keep sending us stuff, whatever you find out, that's fine. Thinking, well, maybe there might be something useful here. But as of right now, it didn't seem like it. The other thing that was happening to Benowitz was that even before Myrna Hansen had come on the scene, he had been standing out on his porch in the early morning hours in the winter in Albuquerque, which when nobody goes outside. If you've ever been to New Mexico in the winter, you just don't really want to go outside after it gets dark because it's very, very cold and windy. He was standing out on his porch and he saw these lights out in this area. Remember I showed you that satellite picture? Here's the, that's the Four Hills. It actually says Four Hills there. This is a map of the base I was given, an old map. He saw these lights sitting out on that area between the mountain and the fence that I showed you, and there were two lights. They would sit there on the ground, and apparently people would come out. There were people at the base of these objects with flashlights kind of looking them over. They'd walk away, and the lights would rise up in the air. They would kind of stay up in the air, maybe move around a little bit, left and right, and then come straight back down. Benowitz started filming these things, wondering what the hell they were, and thinking that they were some sort of UFOs that the Air Force should know about, which seems kind of weird since some humanoid-type people were standing there on the base with flashlights looking at them. He did start filming them, though, and apparently videotaping them as well at that early point in 1979, 1980, when videotape for the masses was kind of a big deal and a very, very expensive prospect. Oh, I just put that in. The Starfire optical range is right there. And I marked that because that's a medical research facility where very strange experiments used to go on with giving people with terminal cancer weird therapies to see if it would help. They would actually sign a thing saying, if I die, it's okay, but if this works, great. And I don't know if they ever found anything out there, but apparently there's also animal research and all kinds of things going on there. Lovelace is a very large medical facility in Albuquerque. It's a regular hospital. You can see ads for them all around town. But they have this secret research facility here on Kirtland Air Force Base where they don't have to have anybody looking at them or asking funny questions. Well, Benowitz was seeing strange things going up and down in that area there in front of his house, in front of the nuclear weapons storage. But the Air Force had its own problems, strangely enough. Coyote Canyon is the area actually back in here. That picture I showed you with the whited out labs, Sandia Labs, that's actually back in this area over here. So Albuquerque's up here. There's a big mountain here. You can't see anything back here. And there's a bunch of entrances to the underground areas all back around here. And I drove on the road up to about this point and actually could see some of them over here. You can't see the roads, though. They're tilted upwards like this, so you can't see the road. All you can see is these concrete bunker-type things coming out of the mountain. So what happened on August 8th and then again on the 11th was some guards, Sandia Lab guards, were out on patrol around the nuclear storage facility, and they saw these objects come flying in, and one of them landed on the ground. Yeah, you can read that if you want. One of the security guards went up to this landed object and found out his radio wasn't working, and then I think he had a shotgun and drew the shotgun and asked who was there. First he thought it was a helicopter, but then when he got closer he realized it wasn't. It was just kind of an oval, very brightly glowing object. As soon as he walked up to it, he said it shot up in the air and took off. I don't know if Benowitz saw this. I don't know if he talked about it, but the Air Force was certainly interested, and they had somebody who will be important in our story later, Richard Doty, go out and talk to these people and find out what was going on. Richard Doty was a officer and was he an officer at that point? I think he was sergeant with the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, which is basically the Air Force's police force or FBI. So he investigated this. They could not explain it, at least as far as this release document says. From the descriptions, I figured out that the UFO came in actually over Highway 10, which is right up here. The Interstate 10 goes along right here. Came in over that, came in, kind of made a turn and landed over here where there's a little shack of some sort. 40, I'm sorry. Yeah, 10 is south. Excuse me. Another weird thing that happened very soon after that, on August 13th, is all the radar went out in Albuquerque for 4 hours. The civilian radar, the military radar, everything, it just shut off. And they had to get people, they had to guide people in just by, radio and, where the pilots thought they were. It was a big mess. But nobody could find out who was jamming the radar. They called up the Sandia Labs. They said they weren't doing it. They called up the other people on the base. No, we aren't doing it. And they never found out who was jamming the radar. And then suddenly at 22:16 hours, that's 10:16 p.m., all radar equipment returned to normal without further incident. Actually, Bill Moore went to the Albuquerque International Airport and said, "Can I see your logbook to see if this actually happened? It's not just some disinformation." And sure enough, it said radar out. No explanation, calling so-and-so, then suddenly at 10:16, radar back on again. So it actually really did happen, and nobody ever admitted to jamming everybody's radar. Almost certainly was somebody testing something to see if they could shut off enemy radar by turning on some device that would do this. But to admit to it would give people a hint as to who was doing it and where it was coming from, and secrecy in the military and in intelligence is pathological, as you know. Sometimes for good reasons, sometimes not. I said that Benowitz had seen these objects floating up in front of his house, basically, when everybody else was asleep. In this area right here, there were usually two objects, like one here and one here, very close to each other. They'd kind of rise up like this, maybe move around a little bit, and come back down, both of them at the same time, like they were connected by a string. I did not describe this way in the book because I didn't know it then. People called me and contacted me after the book because suddenly they realized I was serious about writing the book. I said, "Oh, I thought you were crazy. I didn't want to deal with you." But a lot of useful stuff came out after the book, which you are going to be the recipient of as I go through these slides and this story. Yes, I already showed you that. Why is that still in there? Well, I was told later that possibly some of these things were unmanned aerial vehicles used for surveillance operations, which is possible, I suppose, except nobody knew about these things in 1979, 1980. We just kind of learned about them maybe in the early to mid-90s. This is one you've probably seen. And it would match the movements of I thought they were darting around and doing all these things. No, they would just go up and come back down. So maybe that's what they were doing. And I've suggested that to a couple intelligence people, and one of them who knew what was going on said, "Yeah, maybe," and kind of smiled, and another one said, "Yeah, that's probably what it was." So I'm willing to assume that they were testing unmanned aerial vehicles. If you go in and type UAV, unmanned aerial vehicle, in Google, all this stuff will come up. It's freely available now. There's a very strange one. I just like the look of it, and I was just thinking, how the hell does that thing work? It flies. It's a couple of counter-rotating helicopter blades. However, that's a picture of what Benowitz, a blow-up of one of his movie frames. And this is not a lens aberration. There actually was a blue glow on the bottom of them. I don't know why something being run by a internal combustion engine, gasoline motor, would glow blue on the bottom. So there's a disconnect here between somebody telling me they were unmanned aerial vehicles, as the kind that we're used to seeing, and something that rises up off the ground with a blue glow underneath. And he said the blue glow would come on as it would start glowing blue, and they would go up in the air. So maybe they were unmanned aerial vehicles, but of a different type. There's a picture Benowitz took in the early 1980s. Remember PSA used to have these planes, this color? That's a Pacific Southwest Airlines plane coming into Albuquerque. And I don't know what that thing is. It might be one of those unmanned aerial vehicles. What the hell is it doing flying in the middle of the day? Apparently, I've heard that he didn't see this when he took the picture, which is another thing. It's another issue. Maybe you can only see it at 1,000th of a second or whatever you took the picture at. And to the naked eye, it's just not there. I do not know. I put that one up on Amazon just to titillate people into buying the book. Another thing that was going on at the time, which is what a lot of people probably know about this case, the Cash Landrum case from Texas of December 1980. When I was talking about unmanned aerial vehicles and anti-gravity, I think it was Doty brought up the fact that, yes, they were testing those kind of things, and the Cash Landrum incident was an example of one of those. That was powered by a nuclear rocket when it was close to the ground or in trouble, and used anti-gravity technology when it was actually flying. And when these women saw this, it was actually looked like it was experiencing some problems and shot these flames out the bottom. One of the women actually later died from cancer because of the radiation from it. And they tried to sue the Air Force, and it did not work out. And I won't go into that. But I'm willing to, and actually, if you know this story, as they sat there watching this thing, a bunch of helicopters came in. I think it was 23 helicopters came in that they counted, and kind of surrounded it and shepherded it off in the distance until it seemed to get its equilibrium back, and then took off towards the horizon. And when it got up in the air, this little rocket engine turned off. I was told that there was so much radiation generated by having this nuclear rocket going that the people inside, it was so shielded they couldn't even have windows. So all these things they saw around the edge of this double cone-shaped object, I was told were cameras in 1980. And the people inside that were flying it actually had to fly it by looking at a bunch of video screens. And so that's why the helicopters came in to kind of tell them where they were and how they were doing. As likely a story as any, I suppose. I don't think it's an alien craft. I don't think in the history of ufology there's ever been a craft that flew with rockets and with apparently anti-gravity. I could be wrong. The reason why I'm talking about cattle mutilation stuff is because Benowitz had become interested in cattle mutilations in the mid-70s when it became basically an epidemic in the Midwest and the Southwest. And this was happening in the Dulce area where Gabe Valdez, who I mentioned earlier, was the guy in charge. He was basically the officer for that area. Not very heavily populated. Most of it is on the Jicarilla Apache Reservation. The tribal police have jurisdiction over part of this land too, and particularly in an area that I will talk about. And there's the mutilated, obligatory mutilated cow picture. Anyway, that's Gabe Valdez back when he was investigating these things. There was a cattle mutilation conference. It had gotten so bad, this problem with cattle being found dead for mysterious circumstances, that ranchers were getting very irritated and upset. And there was a meeting in Albuquerque in 1979, convened by the state government, and this is where Paul Benowitz met Gabe Valdez. That's actually a picture of Gabe now. This is from about 4 or 5 months ago when I was in Albuquerque. He was being interviewed for a documentary, which apparently is dead now and is never going to be shown. Oh well. I gave this talk at the UFO Crash Retrieval Conference, and there were some cattle mutilation researcher people in the audience, and I mentioned that when Gabe Valdez went out to look in the fields to, look around the cattle and all that, he found things like this. He showed me his scrapbook from the time. They found gas masks. They found something that looked like radar chaff. Do you know what that is? It's thrown out of the back of planes to confuse radar. When you've got a missile tracking on you, if you throw out a bunch of pieces of metal, it creates this cloud, and hopefully the missile will say, "Oh, that's what I'm tracking." We'll go chase the cloud of strips of metal and not your plane. But this was, he said, he found just piles of it, not piles, but spread all over the ground around one of the cattle mutilation sites. And these little paper envelopes, and some of them had the chaff still in them, like they had whatever device used to eject them hadn't quite pushed all the radar chaff out. And they also found some of that stuff in the cow's mouth, which is a very strange thing. And if this is happening, in at least some of the cases, I tend to wonder if it's aliens doing all this. And there's been a lot of speculation, and even a report issued by Gabe Valdez with money from the Robert Bigelow Foundation people. And that's the conclusion he came to after studying this since the mid-'70s, was that there's very little evidence that there's something extraterrestrial doing it, and a lot of evidence that there's somebody trying to cover up something having to do with cattle diseases. I could be wrong, but that's what I tend to think. And if there are any extraterrestrials mutilating cattle, it's probably in the minority of cases. And there's other cattle mutilation researchers that I won't mention right now that pretty much agree with that assessment. But you know what? It doesn't answer everything. There's things about the cattle mutilations that you wouldn't think humans would be able to do, which leaves the question open. The AFOSI is the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, like I said, basically the Air Force's police force. Benowitz called up the Air Force and said, there's these strange lights over. He was basically thought of himself as a patriotic guy. He was in the Coast Guard during World War II. He called up the Air Force and he said, hey, guys, there's something going on here at the base. There's these lights going up and down. There's this woman that said that she went to an underground facility, and if you don't know about that, probably you should. The other thing he was doing is since he was such a good electronics expert, he had set up a very large array of antennas and recording equipment and had pointed them right at the base and started recording these strange signals. It seemed like some kind of code. And he told them about that too. And of course, the Air Force was very interested in somebody that was looking at all these, in the direction of all these secret projects going on at the base, which I have described some. They put him in touch with this guy, Richard Doty. Some of you may know about him. And Doty talked to him on the phone and actually went over to Thunder Scientific and talked to him for a few minutes and said, what do you got? Benowitz basically described what he was seeing, what I just told you, and Doty figured, well, this is important enough, let's pay a visit to his house. Is it okay with you, Paul, if we come to your house? He said, sure, fine, I'm going to bring somebody along. So on October 24th, 1980, I don't know when this report was written, probably the 28th, 4 days after, it says Dr. Paul Frederick Bennett, which was very strange because he didn't have a doctorate in anything. I don't know what that's supposed to mean. Maybe it's an inaccuracy. Maybe it's a plausible deniability thing. I do not know. Where you can say, well, we called him doctor, so obviously this is a false document because he wasn't a doctor. But Richard Doty, with the assistance of Jerry Miller, who I do not name in the book because he did not want himself named, but this is a lecture, so I guess it's okay. And plus, I've done it in other lectures, and Jerry has not called me and gotten irritated yet. Don't worry, you can't find him. He's very difficult to find. He was a physicist working with the Air Force Weapons Lab, obviously another group and facility at Kirtland Air Force Base, developing, what else? Weapons systems. Jerry Miller had been interested in the UFO subject for quite a long time. In fact, apparently he had been an associate for a while of Dr. Hynek when he was working at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. They knew each other. So Jerry had a heavy interest in the UFO subject, and Doty knew this and said, why don't you come over and see what's going on with Paul here? Maybe we can find out. Benowitz produced photographs and 2,600 feet of 8mm picture film depicting unidentified aerial objects flying over and around Manzano Weapons Storage Area and Coyote Canyon Test Site area. Dr. Benowitz has been conducting independent research into aerial phenomena for the last 15 months. He's also produced several electromagnetic recording tapes showing high periods of electromagnetism. So basically, they went to his house, looked at his setup, tried to see what was going on, see how serious he was and how good he was at what he was doing. Is there any cause for alarm here, suspicion? And they took it one step further. While Jerry Miller engaged Paul Benowitz in conversation, he took a camera, kind of a little spy camera, and was taking pictures of all his pictures and his equipment and everything to take back and show his superiors at the base. That's not in the report. Mr. Miller has contacted Foreign Technology Desk or Division? FTD. Yeah, Foreign Technology Division personnel at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base who expressed an interest and are scheduled to inspect Dr. Benowitz's data. I've never seen anything from Wright-Patterson saying that they inspected his data, but they probably did. And all of you know who the foreign technology people at Wright-Patterson were, right? They were the ones that were handed the UFO stuff for many, many, many years. That changed, I believe, in the early to mid 80s, and was transferred to Fort Belvoir in Virginia, and we'll talk about that as well. DCII, is that what that is? That's a background check. They're going to check out who he knows, who his friends are, where he was born, everything about him. And responsive to HQCR44, that was code for anything to do with nuclear material, because a lot of the stuff he was looking at was right around Manzano. That makes a lot of sense. Oh, then on November 10th, very soon after that, they figured that what Benowitz was doing was important enough that he could come down to the base and give a presentation about what he was seeing. What are you seeing over there, Paul? What can you show us? He showed him his films, he showed him his pictures, he showed him his recordings, described his equipment. He was very open with them. I was told at this meeting, an NSA guy that had talked to somebody had been at this meeting, there were about 15 people in the room when Benowitz started his presentation and about 2 or 3 when he was done. Obviously these people from different areas of the base said this has nothing to do with what we're doing, so we're not interested, and they left. But 2 or 3 people said, thought, yes, this is relevant to what we're doing. We have to keep an eye on this guy because we don't want any more of this information getting out. Who is Paul Benowitz talking to? Who does he know? Is he inadvertently letting out information that he shouldn't? They wanted to find this out. And it's interesting to note that Doty received a phone call from an individual who identified himself as U.S. Senator Harrison Schmitt. Paul Benowitz had been writing letters to Harrison Schmitt and Pete Domenici, the U.S. senators from New Mexico, and his congressmen, and the media, everybody alerting to them what was going on. This also made the Air Force and the NSA and Sandia Labs and the Air Force Weapons Lab, et cetera, nervous. And so the funny thing is that later they had to explain to the powers that be why this guy was doing this with the Air Force's sanction, which we will get into. Now I can talk about Bill Moore and his story. How much time have I used? Everybody still here? Everybody still awake? Is this interesting? Have I been unclear on anything? All right. Anything you want to shoot your hand up and ask a very quick question if I've been unclear, please do. And then we'll, of course, have questions afterwards. Bill Moore was a UFO researcher. He actually wrote the first book on the Roswell incident called The Roswell Incident with Charles Berlitz. Came out in 1980. While he was on a book tour for Roswell incident publicity, he went to different radio stations, of course, did interviews, and one of the radio stations, he went out in the lobby and they said, there's a phone call for you, Mr. Moore, and he picked up the phone. Who is this? Is this Bill Moore? Yes. We think you're the only one that knows what they're talking about. And Bill said, who is this? And he said, do you have time to meet with us? And Bill said, no, I'm leaving now. I've got to go to Albuquerque. So he went to Albuquerque, went and did a radio show, same thing. Another call for you. We think you're the only person that knows what they're talking about. Bill said, okay, so what do you want? Do you have time to meet us while you're here in Albuquerque? Yeah, sure. So the next day, they went to a restaurant. It's actually a fun and interesting story. The guy said, I will be wearing a red tie. So Bill Moore got there early. I think, the meeting was at 3 o'clock or something. He got there at 10 to 3. And he sat in a car across the street from the restaurant. And he said while he was looking at the restaurant this way, through the driver's side window, he heard a tapping on this side, and he looked and he said he sees a red tie hanging down in front of a white shirt. Bill opens the window up and the guy says, I think we're here to have a meeting. So they were watching him while he was trying to watch them from the very first. That's Bill in a picture taken about 2 years ago. I don't know where he got that t-shirt, but that's a picture he wanted me to use. What had happened, the reason they had gotten in touch with Moore is previous to this, previous to him getting contacted there on the radio station, the Air Force had realized that they wanted to start fishing the UFO research community for people who might be cooperative. The reason they wanted to do this is what I've just mentioned, because they wanted to know who knew what. And a lot of UFO sightings occur over and near military bases for some strange reason. Many books have been written about why this happens or who's building them, where they come from, etc. But the fact remains that a lot of military bases seem to attract UFO sightings. So they also seem to attract UFO enthusiasts and researchers and ufologists who stand there with cameras taking pictures of these UFOs. And some of them are not UFOs, and the Air Force would rather people not know about them, sometimes for legitimate reasons, other times not. What the Air Force did, basically, for a fishing expedition, sent out this letter from somebody claiming his name was Craig Weitzel, received by APRO July 1980. Anonymous, government interference in MIB. What you've probably been not listening to me and reading this whole letter. What he basically said was that he had been on a patrol in New Mexico, and they had seen a UFO that had landed, and he had taken pictures of it. And then somebody came the next day, took his pictures, and basically a classic Man in Black story, took his pictures away from him and said not to talk about it. A guy dressed all in black that looked like a civilian. There were also things in the letter like the U.S. Air Force has a crashed UFO stored in Monsanto storage area. I've spoke with 2 employees of Sandia Laboratories who also store classified objects in Monsanto and told me that Sandia has examined several UFOs during the last 20 years. One that crashed near Roswell, New Mexico in the late 50s was examined by Sandia scientists. And the obligatory thing that gets UFO research groups very excited. OSI, which is Office of Special Investigations, AFOSI, is conducting a very secret investigation into UFO sightings. So they handed this letter to Bill Moore. Bill Moore located Craig Weitzel and said, "Did you send this letter?" And Weitzel said, "No, I don't know who sent that letter. I did see a UFO, but it was way up in the air. Nobody got near it. Nobody took any pictures, and I wasn't visited by anybody telling me to shut up. And you're the only person that's called me and asked this." This letter was sent out to 6 or 8 or 10 different UFO investigators, groups, etc., but Bill Moore apparently was the only one, as far as I know, that located him and asked him, at least up to that point, if this had actually happened. And it hadn't. So they ignored it. Apparently, other UFO groups did as well. I don't know I don't know who else got this letter and what they did with it. I was going to change the order of this. Anyway, I will get to this in a second because I have to background it. So after the phone call in the radio station and the meeting, at the meeting, Bill Moore met 2 people. One, this old guy in his probably late 60s, early 70s, and Richard Doty. They both sat there and said, "We're trying to find people who will cooperate with us to keep tabs on the UFO field. Tell us what's going on, tell us who believes what, who's looking at what," because they wanted to find out if there was, from their point of view, if there was any security problems with anything that UFO researchers were looking into. If you want to be suspicious, you can also say they wanted to find out what the civilians knew about the UFO subjects, which seems kind of silly. Completely turns it on its head. It sounds like the UFO community is hiding what it knows from the U.S. government. So I tend to believe it's because it was for intelligence purposes, to find out who knew what and what they might be looking into and what they might get hints about. Because there are people, or there might still be, that from foreign governments that hang around the UFO community and ask questions, pretending to be UFO researchers, but they're doing data mining to find out what the United States might be developing in the way of new technology and airframes, maybe even anti-gravity, secret weapons, things like that. If there's a bunch of people hanging around an Air Force base or military facility taking pictures and watching what's going on for UFOs, there's probably plenty of hints if you talk to them in the right way about what might be going on there and might make sense in light of the other information you're getting. It's just one little piece of information that these people get so they can undermine United States development in these areas. So Moore considered the prospect and said, "I'll get back to you." They arranged another meeting, and when they got to that meeting, they handed him another document, which I will describe later, for him to check out. So what he did actually was agree to this bargain, and he said, "What am I going to get in return?" And they said, "You will get information and documents that no other UFO researcher has ever gotten. We will release them to you. All you have to do is keep an eye on people and tell us what they're doing." He said, "Okay." They actually gave him spy training, how to follow people, how to lose a tail, all these other things. Nothing really high level. He didn't get little spy cameras and everything, but he did learn how to keep an eye out for people. And I noticed this being with him. He'll notice things that most people would never even cross their mind to notice, because 1, he's observant, and 2, he had the training. By 1989, these contacts had died off. He'd gotten a lot of documents, which I will talk about, and he figured since everything had died off and he never made a promise to anybody not to talk about it, he figured he'd talk about it and tell the UFO community what had been happening, because other UFO researchers were also involved in this. Of course, there's no way to prove it because they've never said anything about it, but it stands to reason that at least 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever other people said, sure, give me what you've got, and I will report on what you want. By 1989, he figured these contacts had died out, so he was going to talk about it, announce this to the UFO community. So in 1989, on June 30th, July 1st, and I think it was the last night, Sunday night, July 2nd, Bill Moore was the last speaker. It was the international UFO conference for MUFON in Vegas. He came up on the stage, and he had not told anybody what he was going to talk about, and he had not submitted his talk to the committee. Everybody knew it was going to be something big, and there were rumors flying rampant. That's actually the sheet that he read off of when he made the speech. What happened was he told everybody what had happened, who he had been talking to, and what had happened to Paul Benowitz. And 2 minutes into the speech, people started yelling, and then they started standing up, and then they had to stop the speech, and then they had to stop it again 3 or 4 more times. Insults were flying. I saw somebody run out crying. It was very dramatic. And people asked me, why'd you get interested in this case? It's because I was there, and I wondered, why are people so excited about this? How could you get so excited about something that just seems like a very interesting spy story? It's because they felt betrayed. And in some ways they were. But they also got a lot of information that they never would have gotten, because Moore didn't just sit on the stuff. He checked it out for a while, and then he released it. I asked him about this later. Like these shows little crossouts and things about how he changed it before he was going to give the talk. Friends and enemies, friends and adversaries. I asked him if you would have had the talk to do over again, what would you have done anything different? And he said, I think I would have been a little bit more humble. I said, why do you think that now? And why were you that? Why weren't you humble? Why are you so arrogant? He said, because I was tired of people throwing accusations my way about things of which they knew nothing. And to look at it from his point of view, a lot of us would probably have done the same thing. I find this very interesting. I found this on one of the pages. I believe we are very near to getting these answers we all claim to want. He's speaking to ufologists here. If the nature of these answers turns out to be such that they will change our world, I need not point out that individual lives will all be changed as well. I asked him why he crossed that out, and he said, I don't know. I don't even remember why I crossed that out. But it's very strange in light of the disclosure stuff now about, right around the corner, everything will be revealed by the government. I further asked Bill, I said, well, maybe it's because you didn't think anything was going to be revealed. And he said, maybe. Because it comes up every few years, everything's going to be revealed. The government's going to give us everything. Then, of course, nothing happens. I hope it happens someday. I do not know what the government knows. I think they know far less than we think they do, and they probably know things that don't make sense in light of what we think it's supposed to be. That's just my personal opinion, though. And that's why it probably won't be released anytime soon, because it would probably show that they're not in as much power as we think they are, and they might have something to learn from us, from people that look at it from our point of view. I just showed this to show that he did describe what was going on with Paul Benowitz. I think this is up online. You might be able to find it somewhere. There's a little bit about J. Allen Hynek in here, which is very interesting. I don't know if he's talking about it here. Where does it say J. Allen Hynek? Can somebody see it? Oh, here it is. I examined a computer program Paul was using to decode the alleged alien radio transmissions and communications, and had a lengthy discussion about this matter with the late Dr. Allen Hynek, who had also independently examined Paul's program. You know what's funny is Paul had was receiving these weird transmissions, and he was sort of kind of trying to decode them, and he was actually getting somewhere, because all you have to do is pick out words like "and," "the," "technology," "plane," or whatever, and see how many of these things come up, and a pattern starts to emerge. But it took the NSA, apparently, who was developing this communication system, years and hundreds of man hours, and who knows how much money to develop the system. And here this guy was sitting on his porch with a bunch of dish antennas, starting to figure out what they said. So what the Air Force did was they sent him a computer program for him to use, because he had to build his own computer, write all his software. This was 1979, 1980, 81. There were no personal computers, and if they were, they weren't going to do what he wanted them to do, but he was smart enough to figure out how to build a computer and program it to start decoding these transmissions. The Air Force said, why don't we help you out? And since he was completely in their trust at that point, he said, yeah, sure. And they delivered him a computer that did the translations for him. But of course, it translated exactly what the Air Force wanted him to see. And when I asked around who had delivered this program, does anybody remember, Bill said, I haven't talked about this before, but J. Allen Hynek told me he was the one that delivered it. And I said, why would Hynek do such a thing? And he said, because he was still on the payroll. He was an Air Force consultant. He was actually still on their payroll. It has nothing to do with his UFO research. That was sincere research, but he was also being paid to be an Air Force consultant. He got $4,000 or $5,000 a year still at that point. Because this sounded very strange, I called up Center for UFO Studies, the organization founded by Hynek, now run by, I think, Mark Rodiger. I called up and emailed Mark Rodiger. I said, do you have anything on Benowitz from Dr. Hynek's files? He said, I think we do. Let me take a look. I asked him 3 more times over about 6 or 8 month period, and they never came up with anything, or they want to ignore me, or I don't know what. I'd very much like to find out if it was Hynek that actually delivered that program, because it throws a little bit different light on what was going on with him at that time. Does not denigrate his research in the least, I think, because he was one of the first people to try to use science to find out what the UFO subject was and what it was causing it. But and I'm also surprised more people didn't get all bent out of shape when I mentioned that in the book. Nobody's ever said anything about it. How could Hynek do such a thing? So what I said was Bill Moore got things in return for his cooperation. One of the things he got, the very first thing, which I said I was going to mention, is something called the Silver Sky Memo. Now it is. It's not very well known because it never amounted to anything, and I will tell you why. His second meeting with Falcon and Doty, Bill Moore walked in the restaurant, always in a restaurant. You know what's funny is I met with these intelligence people, and they always want to meet in a restaurant, and they always want to sit in the corner table and make sure there's 2 or 3 tables on either side where nobody is sitting so that they can talk to you privately and nobody else can hear. It's like a habit. Somebody says, I want to talk to you. I say, okay. He says, let's meet at this restaurant. I go there, and I show up, and the guy's sitting in the corner by himself, time after time after time. Modus operandi. This is kind of interesting and funny. They met at the restaurant, and Bill said, so what are you going to give me? And they slid this manila envelope across the tablecloth to him and said, take a look at this. Not right now, just take a look at it when you leave. So Bill Moore opened the thing up, and there's one sheet of paper in there, and what it described was a multiple witness sighting in the mid-1960s, mid to late 60s, over southern New Mexico, including the area of Roswell. So Moore took the paper. He looked up the people. He actually went to these towns and went to the post offices. Good place to start. Where do these people live? Do they live here? Can I talk to them? And every post office, every town he went to, they either said that person's never lived here or they moved away 10 years before this was supposed to have happened. So the next meeting, Moore came back and said, what kind of deal am I in on here? You gave me a document that's full of junk. That this never happened. And he said he remembered this guy Falcon, the intelligence guy. They called Falcon. And Doty both smiled and said, you passed the test. He said, what test? We wanted to make sure that you did things in a methodical manner and didn't just go off screaming and yelling. Because when they give something to you, they want you to be controlled about how you deal with it, how you release it. Not that, because if you sound crazy, the stuff that they give to you is going to be considered to be coming from a crazy person. And they wanted him to sound legitimate. So they actually weren't trying to make him look bad, at least not in an obvious way. So one of the things he got, which everybody is aware of and is very famous now, was the MJ-12 Eisenhower briefing document, which was mailed in a 2 different envelopes, one inside of the other, to Jamie Chanderay's house in Glendale in 1984. It was on a piece of 35 millimeter film. They had to develop the film and then print these off the film. These weren't the pages, they were pictures of the pages. So you couldn't actually tell if the paper was old or what. I'm sure everybody in this room just about has heard of the MJ-12 documents, but this is the thing that started off, and it was directly related to his agreement with the Air Force that he would watch people, and and in exchange he got documents. That's where this came from. That's just another page of it. Stanton Friedman obviously has done all kinds of research on these people, finding out who they were, what their lives were like, and if they could possibly been a member of something like MJ-12, which was supposedly a group convened by President Truman in 1947 to control UFO information and how it was released to the public. And the debate has raged back and forth. I spoke in front of Bob Wood, who's the main researcher, with his son Ryan, who will be here next time, on the MJ-12 documents and the further documents they have gotten since then. And somebody asked me, do you think there was an MJ-12? And I said, from what I've seen, there was one, but I'm not sure if it was involved with the UFO subject. And I said, I'm sure Bob would completely have a different opinion. So, you know, there's a lot of things that I may need to look at to change my opinion. I'm perfectly willing to change my opinion, and that keeps you from going crazy. Another one of the things he's gotten, which nobody has ever seen, and it hasn't been released at all, was a very strange thing he received in 1984, which was a map of Area 51. Nobody even knew about this in 1984. The first mention of it in the public was in the early 90s. I think that Billy Goodman radio show, where they started talking about Bob Lazar, Area 51, and all this stuff that has become legend. But Bill Moore was handed this map in 1984 on a big folded up piece of paper that was made up of 8 or 9 different sheets of photocopied paper taped together. The weird thing about this is that somebody on this map had wrote in something showing these little areas and wrote S4 area, Saucer Mesa, radioactive area, and Groom Lake facility, and Nellis Air Force Range. The mailbox road and everything is over here, and Rachel, Nevada is up here. And anyway, this was in 1984 when nobody knew or cared about this area or before it had become famous. And actually, this turned out to be right. There is an area where they dump radioactive and chemical waste, and people working at Area 51 actually sued the government because they had gotten sick from being exposed to that stuff. He asked what the Saucer Mesa thing was, and they said, well, that's where they have things hidden in the mountain. They fly them out of the mountain there, alien technology. I asked if he ever checked up on this, and Bill said, no, there was really no way for me to check up on it. So I just left it alone. I thought the other documents I got, where there were names, places, people, dates, were a lot easier to check on than this. I can't get in there and check on that stuff. It's a secret base. So because Paul Benowitz was looking at Kirtland Air Force Base, looking at all these, do we take breaks during these? Okay. Is it okay? Is everybody all right? I need a drink. I need a drink. There we go. Because Paul Benowitz was looking at the Air Force Base at Kirtland, all these projects, listening to these transmissions, taking pictures of what was going on, and convinced that it had something to do with aliens invading. Part of this was his idea, and part of it was the Air Force's. You know what? There's a very strange thing. There's a very obvious question. Why did they not just tell Paul to cut it out? Actually, somebody wrote a review of the book and said, he never explains in the book why Paul Benowitz was not just told to cut it out. I actually explained it in 3 different areas of the book in different ways, directly. And the reason was that they could find out a lot more about security breaches by keeping him on the line than just telling him to shut up. We've suddenly found this guy that not only sees what's going on in the base, but he's decoding transmissions out of the base. He's another weird thing is Myrna Hansen, apparently, when she was regressed, described one of the facilities in the Manzano storage area exactly. There was no way that woman could have ever gotten in there. So that made them very nervous too. And nobody could ever figure out, like I said, how she knew that. And so they wanted to keep an eye on Benowitz. They didn't think that she had been psychic or remote viewed it or whatever. Maybe she did, inadvertently. But that was not something anybody outside of that worked in that area, had the clearance, had any right to know. So they wanted to keep Benowitz, keep his trust, keep him doing what he was doing, sort of control what he was doing, but also find out how he was doing it, who he was talking to, and who was paying attention to him, whether, you know, whether he was talking to them or not, because this was right in the middle of the Cold War. And they wanted to know who was talking to who and how information was getting out of the United States, especially from Kirtland. So when Myrna Hansen had been regressed, she said that the underground facility that she had gone to, she had a feeling it was in the upper northeastern corner of New Mexico, near Dulce. So Paul Benowitz became convinced there was an underground base here, and the Air Force said, perfect, all right. This is from this is a translation of the messages that were coming through the computer that the Air Force gave him. And this was printed out on a dot matrix printer in his, you know, that how people used to print out on those long sheets of paper with the holes on the side. He printed out all these messages, which sound like complete gibberish, but they made complete sense to Paul Benowitz. These are little marks he made here as reference points so that he could refer to them, because these things went on for hundreds and hundreds of pages. He just sat there recording, and everything that came out of that transmission was decoded in a way that the Air Force wanted, which looked like this. What does it say? Some of it. We are not separate, victory grow. We have no obligation to keep secret. Now oxygen. Once in a while, this U jump would come in for some reason, and he had an idea about what that is, but I haven't been able to figure out what it is. He thought it was some sort of marker during the transmissions, which it probably was, but not about aliens. Anyway, what does it say? Have many on your side. Universe will contact you in unique way. Water intake, we will tell you. Now listen, 9 may hate you because no distance in kilometer is... Basically, it was they were trying to get him to think that the aliens had contacted him and were talking to him and were giving him information. So it was a closed loop. He'd say the aliens said this, and of course the Air Force knew what the aliens were saying to him because they wrote it. Up above Dulce is a very large mountain that has a flat top, a mesa called the Archuleta Mesa, which some of you have heard of, I'm sure. That's a picture of it from down near the Dulce area. Ooh, what are all those sparklies? That's nice. What Benowitz was led to believe was that there was an underground base under this mesa, and that the aliens were using this base as their main place of operations to take over the planet and abduct people and have abduction rights in exchange for technology. All the things that we know from UFO lore over the last 20 years or so. Nobody had heard of any of this before Benowitz. Suddenly it all crops up when Benowitz is there, and it's basically based on a disinformation campaign against him, which makes me wonder about all these stories. The unique thing about Archuleta Mesa is it's very hard to get to. It's a perfect area to try and hide something, especially if you didn't want anybody looking around. One, it's very hard to get to, and two, it's on the Hickory Apache reservation, so you need their permission to go there. Apparently the Air Force did have their permission because they went up to they airlifted jeeps, tanks, not tanks with guns on them, but like storage tanks, things like that, on the top of Mesa and kind of arranged them. And then they flew Paul Benowitz up there in a helicopter, high enough so that he couldn't exactly tell what they were, but that he could tell that there was something artificial there, and had Doty in the helicopter with him pointing stuff out and saying, look at that, Paul, I think there is some kind of base there, you better take a look at that. Generally drawing his information away from Kirtland and toward way off in the northeastern corner of New Mexico where he wouldn't be a problem. And it was successful because he got obsessed with the area. And people also asked me, well, how do you know that that happened? The only person that told you that was a lying government intelligence agent. Well, it's because I talked to a couple other people that said, I asked them, did Paul ever get flown up there? And they both said, yeah, he was really excited about it. He thought that it was the best thing in the world. The Air Force took him seriously enough that they would take him up there and show him something there that was proved all of his theories. Of course it proved all of his theories. They'd been feeding them to him. And he didn't really need much help. Whenever he took a leap of logic, the Air Force was right there with the one after it to lead him further away. I couldn't believe that he had done this early enough, but this was the first draft of his report on what he thought was going on based on all of his research and his reception of the transmissions, etc. He called it Project Beta. I don't know if there was a Project Alpha. All I know about it's Project Beta, hence the name of the book. He described his electronic surveillance, the signals and the movie film, alien communication and video channels. I talked to, Gabe said he went to Paul's house and he looked at one of his little TV screens and he said he could see like some sort of strange head moving around. He couldn't quite tell what it was, but it wasn't a human head. It was just, and Paul said that's one of the aliens. And then he said he saw something that looked like a large base with things flying around it. Apparently, they were beaming pictures of these things straight into his house. And further, putting icing on the cake. I mean, just further, I can't believe they did all these things, but not only people on the inside, but the people who have no connection with intelligence told me the same thing. It gets weirder and weirder. Unless you think it really was aliens doing this to him. Which, if it was, I don't think it was the great part of the story. The greater part, I mean, the more important part. And if there were any aliens doing anything, I think the Air Force capitalized it on to the point where anything that was true is just covered under so much nonsense. Aerial and ground photographs. He flew his plane up over the Archuleta Mesa and took pictures of things. I don't know if he ever got down low enough to see that these things were just plain old storage tanks and benches and things like that. And the funny thing is, if he did, he interpreted them to be something a lot stranger than they were, because people said that he showed them the photographs that he had taken, and they said they could not see what he saw in those pictures. To everybody I talked to said that. He would show him all these things. This is where the base is. This is where the entrance is. And they'd say, that, I'm sorry, Paul, that looks like trees to me. That looks like a rock. But he was convinced it wasn't. I mean, he had just gone so far that anything that fitted in with his theory was what he saw, and anything that didn't, he ignored. Doty told me it was very easy to get him to believe things because he completely trusted the Air Force. And he would believe anything they told him, just about. That is his translation of some more of the, that's what came out of the computer. Where's the button? And this is his translation of what it says. Den under Archuleta Peak. The base is referred to as the den by the alien life forms. West of Peak, snow gone, snow is melted, on and on. This is stuff about the base under the Archuleta Mesa near Dulce that was being fed straight into his decoding program, well, the decoding program that is given to him. I'm just showing all this stuff to show you how involved and ridiculous it got. After releasing Project Beta to the UFO researchers and state senators, the media, etc., he started sending more letters, Pete Domenici. The funny thing is, he names people, Captain Harris, he talks about Ernest Edwards, who was the AFOSI head at the time. He talks about all these people, and Domenici, Harrison Schmidt, the former astronaut, but then later state senator from New Mexico. Obviously, he was talking to people in some sort of authority and then describing all this insane stuff. So they're calling up the Air Force and going, what the hell's going on here? What are you guys running out there? And they just said, it's national security. We have it under control. Don't worry about the guy. Just ignore him. So, of course, they ignored Paul Benowitz, and that freaked him out because he said, this is the most important thing that's ever happened. Why are these people ignoring me? He even wrote to Ronald Reagan. Here's a very strange thing I found out last year, about 6 or 8 months after the book was released. The Air Force, AFOSI, was apparently disinforming the scientists who work for them. It even went that far. Unless this is a completely fake email that I got from somebody, which it could be. It does name actual people. I just, just to show that, what I showed you here with the unmanned aerial vehicles. Howard Burgess, he was a scientist that worked for the Air Force Weapons Lab, I believe. It was either that or Sandia. He's passed away now. You know what Howard Burgess did, just as an aside, with the cattle mutilation thing? I don't know how he thought this up, but Howard Burgess, along with Paul Benowitz and Gabe Valdez, conducted an experiment. There was a rancher that had a bunch of cattle, and they were slowly disappearing. But the cattle appeared to be from one, I think, from the same bull or the same family or whatever. And those are the cattle that got picked on, that got killed. So they took cattle from that family, or that herd, and ran them through a squeeze chute like they used when they're going into a truck or at a slaughter or whatever, and they shine different wavelengths of light down on them, ultraviolet and infrared and all that. And when the cattle went under the ultraviolet light, they saw marks on the back, big splotches like somebody had thrown paint on them that only showed up under ultraviolet light. I don't know why aliens would need to do that. It seems like a very human thing to do. I thought that was quite an interesting thing that was done very early on, and Burgess was was the guy that thought this up. He was very interested in the UFO subject as well, which probably makes sense in light of what happened here. Apparently in 1985 or so, someone working at Kirtland began telling him, Burgess, and a small group of other lab employees, that the Air Force was flying joint U.S. alien missions out of Kirtland using ET craft which the aliens were supposedly teaching us to fly. Seems like a big secret to be telling people. Even scientists working at the airbase who had nothing to do with the project. Howard and the others were told the ET craft gave off a certain electromagnetic signature. I have the exact frequency in one of my notebooks, which could be detected with simple electronic gear. Yes, like Benowitz had. He actually set up a monitoring unit in his garage. Why Howard and the others would believe this dubious story is unclear. Whoever was telling him all of this was obviously very persuasive and presumably held a position at Kirtland which carried a certain authority, at least in the minds of Howard Burgess and his friends. Yeah, the source for the story would periodically call Howard or one of the other guys and say that on such and such a date at a certain time the signal would be detectable while the ET craft was operating south of Kirtland Air Force Base, near Fort Hills, where Paul Benowitz lived. According to Howard and the others, sure enough, they picked up an unknown signal with that exact frequency on more than one occasion over a several-month period. He and Howard stepped outside. Another source said he and Howard stepped outside after detecting the signal and sighted an extremely bright light above or just behind Fort Hills. So maybe these things that were flying up and down there had something to do with those signals. And they just wanted to confuse the issue so much that like, as Stanton Friedman calls it, there was a laughter curtain kind of lowered around it so people would just not pay attention to it anymore. Even amongst people who worked on the base and supposedly knew what was going on. Apparently they were disinforming them too. And I don't think this is an isolated incident. Do you think so, Walter? Walter's a friend of mine. He actually used to be in the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, so everybody can be scared now that there's a government person. But he helped a lot with the book and describing to me how the Air Force works, how AFOSI works, how information is gathered, and what authority people have. And apparently Doty had quite a bit of authority and went kind of wild with it under the watchful eye of his commanders. Project Aquarius. Anybody heard of this? Well, it was, yes, exactly. If I'm saying something wrong about what it was supposed to be, just tell me. Apparently, it was some sort of project initiated by the U.S. government to teach U.S. pilots to fly alien craft. Is that true? Does that sound right? Well, because that is based on what this document describes. Actually, it doesn't describe humans piloting alien craft. I don't know where anybody got that story and how that got twisted into that. Maybe it's a different Aquarius. This was another document given to Bill Moore, but it was not a released document to make him, to release as a UFO researcher. He was told to give this to Paul Benowitz. What it is you can't read it from here, but trust me, it's a report of an analysis of film of UFOs. And when you look at it, and when Paul Benowitz looked at it, he realized that it was an analysis of his film, his film and his pictures. And Bill was told to hand this to Paul Moore. Bill Moore was told to hand this to Paul Benowitz, and he felt. At this point, finally, he felt a little weird about it. He says, I'm actually giving him something I know that is basically false. Because he'd seen this come in on a teletype, actually, and this was the same thing, but doctored, and he knew it had been doctored. And it had been changed for Paul Benowitz's consumption. So after 3 or 4 months, somebody from the Air Force, maybe Doty or somebody, called him up and said, you give this to Paul or the deal's off. So finally, okay, he went over to Thunder Scientific to give this to Benowitz. And it's funny because he used his spy training against the people who had trained him. He actually took Benowitz in a storage closet. He said, I have something to show you, but I have to give it to you. You know, we have to go somewhere where people can't hear us or see us. And this was at night, too, so there was like a couple employees there, and there was nobody else there. He said they went in a storage closet, Moore picked up a radio, a little portable radio, took it in there and turned it all the way up and closed the door. And he went right up to Paul's ear and said, I was told to give this to you. Please be careful. Take it with a grain of salt. Don't believe everything you read. And Paul said, okay, fine. And apparently he did put it in a safe and never said anything about it to anyone. However, it did its job. It was further evidence the Air Force was very interested in what he was doing and trusted his research. The funny thing about this, in February of 1981, I put that in there because apparently one of these listings here of analysis apparently is describing this picture, which I thought was kind of serendipitous that I had found this picture and then it was mentioned in the Aquarius document. Very strange. Down at the bottom, right at the end, your request for technical assistance because of chance of public disclosure, no knowledgeable personnel with what's SPA? Special project. Okay, special program access will be provided. Continue to receive assistance from individuals mentioned in your message. Miller, who we've talked about. Fugate, who I will talk about. Because of the sensitivity of the case, requests they thoroughly be debriefed at regular intervals. I highlighted the wrong part, but I will read it to you. Where is it? There it is. NASA, which that's actually not NASA, it's National Reconnaissance Office. They changed that. That's actually something that Bill Moore noticed they changed. Filters results of sightings to appropriate U.S. government policy, and results of Project Aquarius is still classified top secret with no dissemination at outside official intelligence channels and with restricted access to MJ-12. Nobody had ever mentioned MJ-12. That's the first time anybody had ever seen anything referencing something called MJ-12 in February of 1981. Then in 1984, he gets that Eisenhower briefing document talking about MJ-12, releases it in 1986, and the rest is history. And you can ask Ryan Wood about that. He is going to be a lot more convincing and have a lot more information than I do, and probably I should come and see the lecture because it'll change my mind. I was looking online after the book came out. I was looking online at Bob and Ryan Wood's site. Their what's the site called? Does anybody know? What's the address? It's not called. Yes, thank you very much. MajesticDocuments.com. And there was a list of documents they had gotten from a man named Tim Cooper in the early 90s. And one of the things listed was Defense Intelligence Agency Organization, Mission, and Key Personnel, March 1981, which is right during the period I was interested in. Perfect, right? So I looked, and there's a lot of people in there who a lot of you, if you're into the UFO subject and intelligence, know about. One of them is Jack Verona, Dr. Jack Verona. But in the Directorate for Scientific and Technical Intelligence, the people that are interested in UFO subject matter, among others, in the Defense Intelligence Agency, one of the departments is Weapons and Systems Division, Mr. J.R. Miller, Gerald R. Miller. It's spelled with a J. So when I talked to Jerry, he said, I asked him, I knew he had some knowledge of what was going on at the base in the early 80s. I said, the first thing I asked him, after sitting in a corner table at the restaurant with nobody else around for 2 or 3 tables on either side, I said, Jerry, what was the Air Force so interested in? What were they covering up? Surely, over 25 years later, you can talk about some of it. And he said, well, there are a lot of things going on there. I'm not sure really what they were interested in. And I was pretty sure that he knew what it was, or at least some of it. And now I know he knew what it was. Look what he was in charge of. Ballistic missile systems, aerodynamic systems, naval systems, ground systems. The guy was high up. And he was a dyed-in-the-wool spy, spook. Or at least very well versed in that area, because that's what he needed to do. You develop things and you shut up about it, and you keep other people from finding out about it. And I will say, the weird thing about a lot of these intelligence people, if they want to help you, they do it in a very strange way. If they don't want to help you, they'll either hand you a bunch of junk or say, I don't know anything about it. And that's the end of it. But if they do want to help you, they'll do it in a weird way. I asked him these questions, and he kind of gave me these equivocated answers, and I'm not so sure. And then the next day, I tried to get on the base, and of course they wouldn't let me on the base. The Atomic Museum, National Atomic Museum, used to be on the base, and you could go in and look at, a model of the first two atomic bombs that were dropped, and missiles and things like that. But after September 11, 2001, very soon after, they moved all that off the base, obviously. So, and I didn't know that, but I went to the gate and I said, I want to go to the Atomic Museum. They said, that's not here anymore. Go, get out, turn around. And so I was only in Albuquerque for a couple of days, maybe 3 or 4 days, and I called Jerry and I said, do you know any way I could get on the base? Somebody I could call and tell them what my purpose is, and it's about something that happened a long time ago. And he said, I don't really know if they'll let you on the base. But what are you doing at 3 o'clock? I said, I don't know, I'm coming back from the library. I guess I'll be in my hotel room. So, another thing that spy people do, and they never get out of this habit, exactly at 3 o'clock his truck pulls into the parking lot. If you say you're going to meet them there at 3 o'clock, you can set your watch to the minute they walk in the door. Every one of them, it's just a habit. You learn to be punctual, and they're there on time probably because they're taking a look to see what you're doing or who you're with before you get there. Anyway, he comes and picks me up in his truck, and he says, let's see if my ID still works. Of course his ID still works. He just showed it at the gate. There's all these warning signs, lights going off, patrol cars driving around, waved us right through. And he drove me on the base. We went on the main road through the base, by the golf course. We went by that wooden thing. I forgot to tell you, it's called the trestle, Trestle. We drove right by that. He told me about that and how it had been decommissioned and those big bolts. He told me about that. And as we get closer to Manzano, remember I asked him all this stuff the day before. What were they doing? What were they so interested in? What were they covering up? As we get near the mountain, he says, "Oh, look, there's. Did you know about that? The Starfire Range?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd heard about it. It's it has telescopes at it or something." He goes, "There was a guy there named Jerry Fugate. He was very clever. He figured out a way to watch satellites, and it was a very exciting thing at the time." I hadn't asked him about it. He just came out of nowhere and said, "Oh, look at that." What I realized he was doing was he was answering my question from the day before without having to directly answer me. So you have to listen very, very, very carefully. I'm sure I missed tons of stuff from a lot of these people, no matter how many notes I took, because I couldn't record what they were saying. They wouldn't let me do that. But obviously he wanted to help me out, but he either thought that he couldn't do it without being, by being obvious, or part of his oath or whatever it was for secrecy didn't involve him answering questions out of context. So I realized that he was giving me a little hint that might have been one of the things that they were very interested in. So I looked into that. I hope I have that up next. No, I don't. But we will come back to it. The story is so complicated and convoluted that I can't possibly make a perfect narrative out of it. I tried to do that way in the book, but real life does not work very well when you try to cram it into a logical story. They do it in movies all the time, which is why when people go see a movie based on a true story, it doesn't seem to have much relationship at all to what actually happened. Benowitz was flying over the Archuleta Mesa up there near Dulce, looking for this base, using his plane, flying over, taking these wonderful pictures. Any pictures that showed anything were taken out of his house when Benowitz was not there. People from Air Force Intelligence would break into his house, steal his pictures, replace them with stuff with blank frames, whatever, and he didn't have that evidence anymore. But they were stealing evidence of something that wasn't even there. However, in October of 1985, something indeed crashed up on the Archuleta Mesa, and Benowitz saw it, and he went up in his plane and took pictures of it. We are not left with any pictures of what he saw there because somebody came in and took them. He went up there and took pictures of where it did crash. Those were not taken away from him because they didn't really show anything. But he seemed to think there was still something there. Whoops. And this is one of his actual pictures with his writing, where he tried to show people what he thought had crashed. Heart reactor. He said it was a nuclear-powered alien craft that the aliens had given us and then shot down to teach us a lesson. And I will get into why he thought that in a minute here. He produced hundreds of these pictures with little diagrams showing where things are. But like I said, he would show these pictures to people, and people could not see what he was talking about. Look, a hot reactor vessel. Well, it looks like it might be a shadow, I guess. Apparent rocket engine. I wish he'd gotten a little bit closer on that. Camouflage ship under ledge. Well, it's camouflage, so I guess you can't see it. Saucer apparently on guard. What is it, that? These look like shadows and things. And no matter who I talked to, they said every picture Benowitz showed us that we could not see what he saw in those pictures. There's many others besides these showing sides of the mountain. There's also some very strange pictures of stuff flying by the lens that are not lens aberrations or anything like that. Just another one of these things where everything doesn't fit into the way I look at it, or the way the UFO people, people that are heavily invested in the UFO secret base idea think of it. There's always these little things that don't quite fit in. However, in the book I tried to explain that most of it was the result of disinformation, and we should be on the lookout for that. This is a letter to Bill Moore about finding the crash up on Archuleta Mesa and what he thought it might be. This is his drawing. He didn't have any pictures left because they were taken from his house. So he drew pictures from memory, and very detailed ones showing what he thought was what had crashed there, what it looked like, how it had broken up, ground charred and burned, reactor vessel, metal bubble, or over pilot cockpit. This is what he said had crashed. He said 2 of them had crashed there. And then about 2 months later, apparently this is what he remembered. And the problem was he kept changing his idea of what it looked like. And then he said that was what he remembered. Very strange that he kept changing it when he didn't have his pictures anymore, and I never been able to figure out why he changed his perception of what the thing looked like. But I started to think, what could have crashed up there besides an alien-piloted, a human-piloted alien craft powered by a nuclear reactor? And his drawings look something like a prototypical stealth fighter, which was being tested at the time, and nobody knew about this. It had been flying since, I think, the early 80s, maybe? Late 70s even. And here in 1986, I believe that his drawings sort of look like this. I mean, if you saw one of these crash somewhere and you'd never seen one, you wouldn't know what the hell it was. It looks very strange to me. It looks like an alien ship. And that's a prototype. That's not even what it finally looked like, so that might have been what crashed. I was also told that it was an unmanned aerial vehicle, like the Predator kind that looked like this. And in 1986, that was a very, very hush-hush thing. I mean, we only just found out about this, 2 or 3 years ago? And sort of looks like that. Looks very much like this one. His drawings look very much like this fuselage here, if it had crashed. Do you agree with that? I mean, if I have to pick something out that isn't an alien craft, it looks like these are the closest things I can find, and something that would probably be something that the Air Force would not want anybody to know about as part of our developing defense arsenal. So what they did was they hired somebody, or found somebody from the NSA who was affiliated with Lockheed Corporation to start talking to Paul Benowitz. And he started sending him letters. Draft of letter to Benowitz, December 11th, 1985. Okay, I'm sorry, it happened in 1985. So immediately they started writing him letters about this. Something interesting is going on in the Dulce area, no positive or negative response to your query. Basically take him in his confidence, saying, you're doing good work, please give us more. They just wanted to find out what he was looking at and further twist his kind of worldview. And he started sending him letters with this kind of stuff. 7,000 years ago, a group of people revealed us to be the E-bands, which I guess is supposed to be like EBEN, extraterrestrial biological entity, I think, originating from the green planet, created 2 races of mankind, Homo sapiens and Swedes, S-W-E-A-D-S. I think he means Swedes like Nordic UFO occupants. Basically, what he says in these letters, if you're still reading, is that aliens created humans. And they're basically trying to keep control of their creation, and that's why the aliens are here. And Paul, you're exactly right, and it's very important work you're doing. He talks about he incorporates the Roswell incident into his letter. I don't know. I included these in the illustrations for the book, but they did not go in because there was only a limited amount of space. However, my descriptions of it were left in there. If you think there was somebody trying to cover up what I said, must not be anything important because none of it was covered up. That describes the Roswell incident, just taking the facts of the case known from Bill Moore's book at the time and working it into a theory that fits in with what they're trying to tell Benowitz about the history of this planet and aliens being here. I'm not saying it's false, but the fact that they're lying to Benowitz left and right and upside down and backwards makes me think that these kind of stories are very dubious. Project Aquarius, a project designed to notify man of our creation by the E-bands. Okay, well then that's what they were trying to push Project Aquarius as that. And then another one called Project Sigma about communicating with aliens. But this is the first, this was December '85. Within a few years after that, Project Aquarius, Project Sigma, and all that stuff were being touted by John Lear, Bill English, and all these people as the very most secret information from the people in the know who knew what was going on, and that they were incredible revelations. But it came from this stuff. And through ufology into a crazy, ridiculous period, which I think it is maybe just now recovering. Yes, that was a draft of a letter. However, he did send it because this is Paul's letter back to the guy whose name was Ron, but I'm not going to use his last name because I haven't talked to him yet and gotten permission to use his name. He is still alive. So they went back and forth with these letters, and there's him writing back and replying to this letter. It's funny because he starts talking, he takes out this is an edit of the letter. He wants to say that he wants to change Dulce to Las Vegas and New Mexico to Area 51. He's talking about an Area 51 here in 1985, again, before anybody knew anything about it. Either because there is some alien piloted stuff going on there, or they want people at this early date to desperately want people to believe that. Maybe a combination of the two. Okay, what were they covering up? Well, I told you that Jerry said that the Starfire range had something to do with it. These things were probably some sort of unmanned aerial vehicles, but like I said, they have all the characteristics of what we've heard in rumors as anti-gravity type craft, which very well may be in development and have been working for 50 years. If you read material by Tom Vallone, Nick Cook's book, there's some other ones too. Joseph Farrell's book, Brotherhood, and Reich of the Black Sun. They weren't concerned about this. Electromagnetic pulses do not send out, designed to fry electronics, do not send out intelligible signals. I thought this was what it was very early on, but it's not really well supported because there's no messages embedded in huge electronics flying electromagnetic signals. However, the fact that Jerry had said that's a very interesting thing and left it at that made me think later. So I looked into the Starfire range. Looks like an observatory. There's a telescope. There's one in there. There's one in there. There's a little one. This is at the base. The guy mentioned in that document, along with Jerry Miller, was Fugate. This is Robert Q. Fugate. He is still actually a optical physicist working for the Air Force, or for Sandia, I think. Anyway, he was the head of the Starfire optical range, and I believe, at least until recently, he still is. He's very old now. He must be in his 70s. But in the mid-70s, he developed a system to look into the atmosphere. And when you look up at stars and things at night, they twinkle. It's because the atmosphere is so thick and air currents and all that bend the light. And what they wanted to look at was not a bunch, they're not sitting there looking at stars and planets and the moon and all that and comets. They don't care about that. They're there to work in intelligence. So what are they looking at? They're looking at spy satellites. So what Fugate did was he invented a system that would immediately cancel out what the atmosphere was doing to bend the light. Like if you look in a pool and the thing is kind of, you know, you look at something and it's kind of like waves in a pool, you can't really see what's going on. This was kind of an artificial way to smooth it out into a glass. What they had was a, whoops. You know, there's an objective mirror where the starlight, the light comes in, is gathered and magnified so you can see it. I'm almost done. Underneath this mirror were a bunch of hundreds and hundreds of little tiny air pneumatically driven plungers. And they would kind of sight on a star and look at the star and with the mirror and everything in the field of view. If you sighted that one star and looked at how it was bending, there was a computer to control the mirror to bend it in exactly the right direction so that the air currents and the light bending was canceled out, so they could see things clearly from the ground without having to be above the atmosphere. And just about 4 or 5 years ago, suddenly astronomy magazines and everybody were all excited, over 25 years after it was developed. So it's a product of spycraft, spy tech that is another example of, if you hear about something, it's probably been in use and it was developed and has been in use for at least 20 years or more, 10 or 20 years. But what they were doing with this, we're looking at spy satellites that were coming over this, the base and taking pictures, Soviet spy satellites. And that's an example actually from the Starfile Optical Range website. That's a picture of a satellite without adaptive optics. That's with it. And that's after they kind of clean it up with Photoshop or whatever the Air Force uses. And that's a satellite moving, I don't know what, 12,000 miles an hour coming over the horizon and going like this. And they were moving against the background field of stars. So you can't really sight on a star because it's always moving. So what Fugate did, in a further burst of genius, was to discover that you could actually shoot a laser up into the atmosphere and look at how that was bent by the atmosphere. So then, as it was moving, you didn't need to sight on any stars. You could follow along right with the satellite. And this is actually a picture from, somebody told me last night, the Keck Observatory in Hawaii of an adaptive optics system actually in use with the laser shooting up. The reason they were interested in these satellites, one, yes, of course, they were looking down and taking pictures, but I was also told that they found out how to control these satellites without the Soviets knowing about it. They were communicating with the satellites with lasers, by laser pulses like this, not radio waves, because radio waves you can pick up. Laser pulses go straight. You have to be right in the beam to get any information. Otherwise, if you're outside of the beam, obviously you're not going to pick it up. So they were controlling these satellites with lasers, and there's a huge laser facility there, and there's one actually at White Sands as well. So they were cooperating with White Sands. What they would do is they would, as the satellites came over, they would identify it as a Soviet satellite and then flash a message at it and actually cause the satellite to turn and face away from the Earth. And then we'd come back around the other side, and the Soviets would look at the satellite and go, "What happened?" He was pointing at Earth. Now he's not pointing at Earth anymore. So they would change it right back, and it would come back around the other side maybe 2 or 3 times just not to get any suspicion, and then they'd flash it again like that and turn it in another direction. And the reason they knew to do this is there were people in the Soviet Union that were planted there in on the development of these satellites and knew the innards of them and knew how they worked. And they were sending us information back. So, you know, if Paul Benowitz even hinted somewhere that somebody in the United States knew what was going on, knew how to control these satellites, these people in Russia would have been imprisoned, killed, whatever. At the very least, their cover would have been blown, and the program would be dead. So apparently, it was worth it to them to keep Paul Benowitz on the line and actually have him get worse and worse psychologically until he was institutionalized. This is a picture that Bill Moore gave me. I wanted to put in the book, but the publisher said it doesn't reproduce very well, especially not in color. It would have had to be on the cover in very high resolution. Right down here, I think, between these two little bumps here, that's the top of Manzano Mountain. This is the house across the street from Paul Benowitz. He's looking straight out at the base. Bill Moore was standing on Paul Benowitz's porch one time in the middle of the day, and Paul said, "Bill, take your camera and point it out this way at Monsanto and take a few pictures." And Bill said, "Well, why should I do that? There's nothing there." He said, "Put it on 1,000th of a second, the shutter, and just take some pictures, because sometimes stuff shows up." And when he got it back, there were a lot of pictures of the mountain, and one of this, of some weird thing shooting up from the thing. And I don't know why, it seems like it disappears right here, like it's like cut off. But that's about where the Starfire Range is, and something's going on there. He was taking, so apparently he was also taking pictures of what they were doing. Apparently you couldn't see this with the naked eye. It had to be at 1,000th of a second. Very weird picture, and I don't know what it is, but it might have something to do with that laser sighting stuff, which would also indicate that they were doing it during the day as well, which makes sense. The satellites can see a lot more in the day. By 1988, Paul Benowitz had gotten to the point where Bill went to lunch with him once and noticed he smoked 10 cigarettes in a row and didn't touch his food. And he was shaking like this, and he told him, you know, Paul, I think maybe you ought to lay off some of this stuff for a while, because it's really affecting your health. And people are worried about you. And Paul Benowitz said, "No, I'm okay, I can hold it together." But very soon after that, his family was so worried about his state of mind and his health that they actually had him put in a mental health care facility. I actually found it. It's still there. Behavioral medicine. It's, the funny thing is, if you keep driving down that road, you go through the Wyoming gate of Kirtland Air Force Base, that other picture I showed you. This is like 2 miles up the road from Kirtland. A very weird little piece of coincidence. I arrived there in about 2 weeks after this, in July of 2003. I went to Thunder Scientific and wanted to ask somebody there, unannounced, because I figured if I called up first, there'd be some problems. I walked in and I found Matthew Benowitz, his son, who's running the business now, and I said, could we go somewhere and talk, because I didn't want to embarrass him in front of his employees or whatever, because I knew it was not a very good time in their life. And he said, yeah, let's go in this, we got a conference room, so we went in there, and I said, I'm writing a book about your father and what happened to him in the 1980s. And before I even finished the sentence, he said, absolutely not, we want nothing to do with it, and then just kind of stood there and basically saying, get out. And at that point, I really didn't feel like writing the book, because I felt like I'd be invading these people's privacy. But and then he said absolutely not, and then he added, oh, and my father died 2 weeks ago. So I had just arrived there at the perfect time to bother him about something, an episode in their life where they almost lost their father. And some people have really, I've noticed on the internet and stuff, has said, you don't really, as the writer of the book, don't really take the Air Force to task and make kind of a moral judgment on it. And my response to that is because I'm not here to tell you how to feel. That's not my job. I have certain feelings about it, which I will tell you about, but the point was to get the story out and to show what had happened and try and show it as fairly as possible, which actually, you know, some people, because they're so suspicious and of authority, which is very well founded, I agree, can't listen to something that appears to put the Air Force and the authorities in a good light. They thought they were doing the right thing. The only problem was when they noticed that Paul Benowitz was getting worse and worse and is deteriorating mentally. He was letting his business, he had other people taking care of his business, his employees started taking care of it to the point where he couldn't function. They didn't let up on him. And, you know, if I have to say that I have a moral problem with anything, and definitely that's one of them, they went way too far. I don't know. Apparently it was worth it to them that somebody was going crazy and was maybe going to die and losing his touch with reality, as long as these projects were covered up and protected. When, you know, in the first place, all they had to do was tell them to cut it out, and they didn't, and by that time it was too late. So it was handled very badly. One weird thing that happened later was, whether this is true or not, or sincere or not, Richard Doty said he went and visited Paul Benowitz in the hospital once. Not when he was in for his the first time for having a nervous breakdown, but later. it really affected his health. I mean, he was sick off and on for the rest of his life. I couldn't have talked to him anyway when I got there. He had been sick for so many years. He wasn't in any condition to be interviewed, and the family would never have let me do it. But Doty said he went to the hospital and while Paul was in the hospital, because he'd actually become friends with him. They had so much interaction, and they knew so much that other people didn't know, that they had formed this kind of bond and friendship. And he said, I felt bad about it, so I went to the hospital, and I finally said, you know, Paul, a lot of that stuff we told you was just not true. It was meant to cover up stuff that was going on at the base. And he said, Paul looked at him and he said, no, it wasn't. It was true. Even after Doty told him at that point that he had been lying to him, Benowitz was so far gone into that world, he didn't even believe when somebody was, the person that had been lying to him the whole time told him about it and admitted it. So it just is a very sad story, but it also has a lesson, which is, like Sandra said in her introduction, is not to confuse the authority of the truth of the message with the authority of the figure, like Paul Benowitz did. And then conversely, actually, not to think that every time somebody from intelligence comes to talk to you that they're lying to you. Yes, well, of course they're lying to you, but not all the time. And that's another issue here with dealing with intelligence people and former intelligence people and the UFO subject. If they want to help you, they'll help you. But you have to pay attention, and you have to realize, like Bill Moore said, that you're playing a game. And if you don't play the game, you get nothing. If you do play the game, you play by their rules. And you're at the bottom of the barrel there. You have to take what they throw at you and probably sit on it for days, weeks, months, years until you find out if it's true or not. I don't know if, you know, I'm pretty sure a lot of stuff I said in the book is as true as I could find out. But then I found out more stuff afterwards, which I've talked to you about here. So it's a very weird game and very, at times, paranoia-inducing game, but eventually you get tired of the paranoia and you just get interested in the game. And I still think it's very interesting, and if I find another story like this, I'd love to write about it. And I think that's all I have to say. Thank you.